And welcome to the Breaking Apart tutorial. Now, I almost didn't include this project because it could be a little bit advanced for some users, but I wanted to go ahead and include it and just sort of walk you through and show you some of the techniques that I used so you could apply the same effects to your own images that you have. All I did was just went to istockphoto.com and I picked up a stock image of this woman, and then I gathered together a couple textures. And that's all I really used to create this image. If I go into the Adobe Bridge, you can see clearly that I just have these three images right here that I used for this project. You can go into the Breaking Apart folder inside the Project Files folder on this DVD, and you'll find these three images right here. And you'll also find the completed image. And you can use or open up this image here to walk along with me through this tutorial. So the first thing I'm going to do is deconstruct this image so you can see exactly how I created it. And then later on I'll show you some techniques that you can use to create this breaking apart effect. I'm going to go over to the layers palette, and you can see here that I have several layers. What I'm going to start to do is start making these layers invisible, just one by one. I'm going to remove the color overlays and the shadow. And what you'll start to see happen here is I'm going to reveal the original image. I'm removing the textures and the masking and some of the other larger pieces on the image, some of the shadows and the image adjustments here. And now we're back to our original image. And this is just what I started with. I created a backdrop layer, covered her face completely with black, but I also cut her face out, placed it on a layer above that, and then I started selecting parts of her head and just spread out the pieces along. And then I went ahead and did some other masking to her eyes and added some shadows and some other pieces floating in the air. I wanted to create this illusion like the pieces were just floating off, just gradually, like she was just falling apart or breaking apart, and the pieces were just flowing in the air, and they started to flow out and then start to come towards you. As you can see that I added these larger pieces here, so it looks like the pieces are going back and then they're sort of coming around. I'll go ahead and move this over a little bit. Yeah, as you can see, these looks like it's sort of coming around. And then I applied some textures to it. I wanted to get that whole grungy type of look to it, almost like a porcelain doll type of look, or something where she doesn't really look human. It could be like a robot or a creature or something, I don't know. But I also added some dirt textures, like some cracked mud texture in there. And I'm missing this bottom. Let's see here. There we go. And then I added some color overlays to make everything blend in, because you can see I didn't want to leave that glamour makeup on her face there, because I just figured that wouldn't look very futuristic. So I decided to go ahead and just apply these blending overlays here, these different colors, over the entire image. So everything just blended in really nicely like that. And then I did some masking on the top of the head here, just to get that nice rounded top part of her head. Yeah, so that's pretty much how I created the effect. But those are all the layers on the completed project, so you can see how I put all this together. But the most difficult part is creating this breakout effect here. It's to make it look like these pieces are just coming off her head here. I'll just go ahead and get rid of these textures. This is just the layer with the woman's head and the pieces that are breaking out there. So let me show you how I started this and how I achieved this effect. I'll just go ahead and move this out of the way. And let's start off with our stock image right here. In order to get her head to break apart and have the pieces float and scatter over the back of the photo over here, what we must do is cut out her head and place it on a new layer and then start cutting out pieces on her head and then dragging those pieces over the photo, sort of over here in this direction. So you sort of have to visualize and have a plan in place, or at least a vision on what you're going to create. You can go in there and start to experiment with things if you want and gather some inspiration or whatever, but it's good to have a plan in place. So let me go ahead and show you what I did here. All I did is I selected the lasso tool on the toolbar, and then I just selected her head here, and I want to make sure that I'm going just with her hair. If you have somebody that has hair, I'm just going to go right along the edge of her face and hair. And this doesn't have to be perfect. You just need to create a simple selection around her head with the lasso tool. I'll come up here to edit, copy, and then I'll go over here to edit and paste. And so now we have this on its own layer. Look at that. And I'll just go in here and name these really quick. I can just call this head cutout and stock. Whoops. Sometimes if you double click a little bit too fast there, if you're not directly on the name, it will open up the layer styles dialog. So I'm just going to double click on the name here, and we'll just call this is the original stock image. So I'll just call this stock image. Also, I'm going to want to make a duplicate of this head cutout image here, because we're going to sort of create this guide for us to help us in determining where we want these little pieces that we're going to be pulling apart from this woman's face here. So let's just go ahead and make a duplicate of this layer, and I'm going to name this stretch because we are going to stretch this image. And then I'll drag this below the head cutout. Okay, next, I'm going to go ahead and just make this stock image layer invisible and make this background invisible so we can see the background here. Now what we must create is sort of like a guide, so we know how far to pull the pieces from this image, the distance, and things like that. So what we're going to do is on the stretch layer right here, I'm going to come up here to edit and free transform, and I'm going to pull this out. I'm just going to stretch this just about like this. So you need to stretch the image as far as you want the pieces that are breaking apart from the head. Okay, and I'll show you. Let's see, I'll go ahead and just press the enter key on the keyboard, and then what I'll do is lower the opacity of this down just a little bit, something like this. And I can even turn the background layer on here so we can see the detail in that a little bit. And then I'll click on the head cutout layer right here. See, if I didn't have this stretch layer and we started to come in here on the head cutout layer and started breaking pieces apart, well, you could break all the way to this point right here, but you might have all the pieces over here, and then you're going to just have this big gap because you've pulled all the pieces off this side of her head here. Well, we don't want that gap there. We want it to be very gradual. So when I started this, I had to think like, what am I going to do so I will know how far to go when I cut these pieces out. See, do I go way over here or do I go right here? Because you want it all to sort of blend and have the the space in between each part. You want it to be nice and even. And it's not going to be perfect. You can always go back and, fill the spaces in later on. Okay, so it's not going to be perfect, but that's why I wanted to create this stretch right here. That way we can see, okay, I've stretched this, so what I can do is pull a piece out and take it to just right about there, and then I can take another piece and pull it out and another piece. So yes, I did every single piece. I cut it out this way. And it was a very therapeutic type of process. But it really creates one of those, how did you do that type images. But you can see if I keep doing this and using this stretch layer here in the background as a guide, I'm much better off having everything fit evenly later on. And let me show you how I do this. I hold down the Control key, which is the Command key on the Mac, and I make a selection. And let me go ahead and just zoom in here a little bit closer so we can see this. But I'll select the lasso, and then I'll draw a selection, just a random crooked, it doesn't have to be a perfectly round circle. You almost don't want it to be because it needs to look like it's jagged and it looks like it's breaking apart. So I'll hold down that control key and click in the middle of that selection. You'll see the little icon here, little cursor change to a black arrow with a little scissors icon on it. And then if you click in the middle there, you can pull out a piece. Well, you'll want to try to place this piece in the exact same spot where you cut it out from. Okay, you see what I'm getting at here? So if you do it this way the whole time, there's going to be a better chance everything's going to fit in evenly when you get all done with this. So I'll just come in here and start pulling the pieces off. And I notice the closer you get, then you end up making smaller pieces. And again, you can go back and fill these in later on. But this is all you do. I mean, you sit here, it took me like, a couple hours, but it was really cool. It was a lot of fun. I'm getting a little sloppy here. You can also cut other pieces off like this. If you find your pieces are a little bit too perfect, then you can cut them apart. Try to avoid any type of straight edges, because that just doesn't look very real. And just you get to cut those up with a lasso tool, something like that. And this is the whole process. Whoops, let me go ahead and, there we go. And you continue this until you get very close to her face. By the time you get to her hairline over here, you really have to plan ahead. You have to know where you're going to stop. So we don't want to start breaking her eye apart and her mouth. So what you can do is make sort of like a guide so you know when to stop. So you could just paint something. I could make a new layer and choose black. And this is just a little thing here so you can see what I'm talking about here. But you can plan ahead where you want to stop. So let's see if I want to make something that looks like this. Whoops, there we go. Now I'll just come in here and I'll just around the cheek a little bit and over the eye and then over here and then somewhere over here. And you can keep this on a layer here and call it guide. Face guide or something like that. I'm not really good with names, so I just whatever comes to my mind. But this will help you so you know where to stop when you're breaking apart your image with the lasso tool. Okay? All right. And all you do is continue until you have something that looks like this. Now I've used the exact same process that I talked about just a moment ago to achieve this effect. I got really close to her face and I started drawing these little circles here. Let me go ahead and just make sure this is selected. I would come in here and with the lasso draw little selections like this. Hold down Control, which is the command on the Mac, and pull the pieces apart. Okay? So it's the exact same process all the way through. It takes a little bit of time. Now, I could show you how I did the whole thing, but that would probably take a couple hours, and I'm not sure if you're going to want to sit through that whole thing. So I wanted to just show you exactly how I did this. Also, when you are finished, when you get all the way to her face, and you're following that guide that you created, well, when you get there, you're also going to want to make sure that you can crop this side of the face over here on this image. Now that I've completed all this, what I can do is make sure that her face is masked very close to the edge all the way around, even the eyebrows there, or the eyelashes, sorry. But that's what I did. I used the pen tool, and I came through here and right along her face, and I cut that out. If you want to know more about cropping and masking, if you want to master that, then check out the masking and cropping video on this course, and I'll show you and tell you all about that. But you can see that I've cut out this side of her face so it looks nice and even. And then I made this stretched layer invisible. And this is what I have. Now we can make the background visible again. And it might look something like this. We have the original stock image in the background now. Now I'm just showing you all this now with the final product image. That's called Breaking Apart. And I'm just going to walk you through from here on and show you exactly how I applied the textures and things like that. But you can see that I've turned on the stock image here so we can see it through the background. So what we must do is create sort of like this black background behind this side of her head. Because if we don't, then it's just going to look, you know, you're going to have the pieces over her head there and it's just not going to look right. So what I did is I created this backdrop layer. So what I did is I took the selection of her head here and I've just filled it in. You can see this is what it looks like. It's just a filled black shape here. That's all it is. And by having that there, now it looks like this. So we are completely covering up her face because we don't want that original face in there because we've already modified it. We don't want that there. We want to have that breaking apart layer show up instead. So by having that black behind there, now we can see it looks like the pieces are really coming apart there, like they're really falling apart off her face. So that's one thing that you'll have to keep in mind when you're doing this with your own images, is that you have to cover up the face or the object with like a black shape or a backdrop or whatever color you want. And it looks like to me that that's not even lined up correctly. So I could probably just come in here with the arrow keys on the keyboard and there we go. Something like that. You know, you get the idea. So, but after all this, I started to apply textures to this image here. And so what I did first is I grabbed the peeling paint texture right here. So I'll double click on that and bring that into Photoshop. Then I'll come up here to select all, edit, copy, and then I'll go ahead and close this out. And then what I'll do is paste this texture here. You can see I've already done this, but I'm going to go ahead and repeat this whole process here so you can see exactly how I masked this texture onto her face. I'm going to come up here to edit and down here to paste. And yes, I'll go ahead and click OK. So we want to get this texture over her face. And I did this with just an overlay. Or actually I used like a color burn or something like that. I used an image adjustment or a blending mode to blend this texture over her face. And we can do that right now by clicking on this texture and then coming over here to color burn. And then I can go over here to edit, free transform. And what we can do is resize this. I can hold down Alt and Shift, which is Option and Shift on the Mac. And I can resize this texture down and position it where I want on her face here. And I'll just move this around here till I find a spot that I like. I kind of like this crack here, or this whatever it is going through her eye. So I think I'll probably leave it somewhere around here. And I'll go ahead and press the checkbox at the top of the options bar, or press the Enter key on the keyboard to confirm that. So let's create a layer mask on this layer. I'll just do this really quickly. I'll click on this Add Layer Mask button right here, and then I'll select the paintbrush with a large soft brush, and I'm just going to paint on the areas that I don't want that texture to be on, because having that texture there now is just covering up a lot of these areas, and we want to be able to see all these areas, so we don't want that texture there. I can even zoom out here a little bit and let's see about getting the very top of that. Looks like that's something else there, so I'll just leave that. And we can see that texture is a bit dark. So in this case, what we can do is click on this texture layer, hold down the Alt key, which is the Option key on the Mac, and I can create an image adjustment to brighten this texture. And that'll make it blend in really nicely. But I want to hold down that key while I select brightness and contrast on this menu here. And then I'll put a little check box or a little check mark in that box right there. And then I can brighten the contrast of this a little bit, something that looks like that. And I can go back to that anytime because it is an image adjustment, so I can just double click on that and bring it back and make an adjustment anytime I want. And I'll probably click on here and touch up a little some areas. And I'm just showing you this very quickly here so you can understand how I did this, but I don't want it on her lips here, so I'm just going to make it look like this. There's also some other techniques that you can do to form certain things like lines. You can form those to the face just a little bit more. I can click on that texture layer. So what I'll do is draw a selection around this scar here on this texture. And then let's come up here to select, and what we're going to want to do is feather this selection so it's nice and smooth. So when we distort this scar, it's going to be nice and smooth around the edges. Now I'm using Photoshop CS3. If you're using an earlier version, you'll find the feather option right underneath this menu here. But in Photoshop CS3, it's now in Modify, and then you'll find a little menu will pop out, and then you'll find the feather option right here. I'm going to go ahead and feather this by 20 pixels, so just enter in 20 there and press the OK button. Next, let's come over here to Filter, and down here to Distort, and select Shear right here. And this will allow us to shear and to push this or to curve this scar just a little bit so it looks like it's going with the shape of her face, sort of almost like a cheekbone or something like that. So I can make a little point in the middle here and just pull this out just a touch and maybe move this up just a little bit, something like that. Let's go ahead and see how that looks. I'll click OK, and there you go. You can see that sort of pops out there on her cheek. And I'll just come over here to select and deselect that selection. So you can do something like that, you know, make that texture, make it look like it really fits on her face. So those are just some other little creative things that I did to this image to make it look a little bit more realistic. I'm going to go ahead and just click on this paintbrush and paint on this mask. I don't want that scar going through her eye, so I'll just go ahead and do something like that. Okay, great. And last, what I did is I applied a texture to all the pieces that are breaking apart here. So let's go into the Adobe Bridge, and I'll just double click on this texture right here, which looks like some old mud, cracked dirt or salt ground or something like that. I thought it looked pretty cool, so I picked this out. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this. Let's bring it into Photoshop, and I'll come up here to select all, over here to edit and copy. And then I'll scroll down here, I'll click just above this texture that we applied on this image adjustment, and I'll come over here to edit, paste, and that'll place it just above the image adjustment on our peeling paint texture layer here. What we're going to do is blend this texture over the image in the back. So let's come over to this layer's blending mode menu here, and let's select overlay. Now what we're going to do is mask this just like we did before. You can see that this texture is over the face of the woman here, and so that's not looking too hot. That's not really the type of look that I was looking for. It's sort of taking away the beauty of the face, and so what we're going to do is create a layer mask. So I'll come down to the bottom of the layers palette and click on Add Layer Mask right here, and I'll select a paintbrush with black as the foreground. So we will be painting black on this mask. I'll make this just a little bit larger here, and I'll just start to paint on this mask where I don't want this texture to be at. And you can see that texture blend really nicely over those pieces that we pulled apart from the face. And I'll go ahead and turn on my larger pieces here. And you can see that those are being blended nicely. And I did create an image adjustment for this as well. And there you go. So we can see we're moving along right now, and it's starting to look like the final image. I'm going to go ahead and turn on this bottom shadow here, which I created with a gradient. And that's pretty much the whole thing here. And you can see that I've created many image adjustments for this project. I even created one that enhances her eyes a little bit. You can see right here. And then I used my classic brown-blue blend for this. I basically created a layer and then filled it in with brown, and then added a color overlay from the blending mode menu. I turned down the opacity, and I then added a blue fill layer with an overlay blending mode, and then a second blue blend layer and overlaid that as well. And you can see that now it's starting to look really a lot like the original. And I can see areas on her face here that I really don't like from that texture. So if you're applying textures, you can just come through here, click on the layer mask of the texture, which is this one right here. Select the paintbrush and just come in here and start to erase away the areas of the textures that you don't want. There you go. Okay. And that's pretty much how I created this entire image. So you can see that some things look a little bit more complicated, but a lot of it is just a little bit more time consuming than most of the projects that we've done on this course. But I'm glad I included it so I could show you, and I know there's a lot of people that wanted to make sure that this one was on the course, and so here it is. I hope you got a lot out of this and hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and we'll see you guys on the next video.